The train that pulled into Willow Creek left Eleanor Sullivan on the platform with a single trunk and an iron will. She had left behind the gilded streets of Boston, along with shattered promises and a bitter betrayal. Before her lay a land that was vast, unforgiving, and utterly free. While others came seeking gold, she sought something far more valuable, a place beyond judgment, a place where she could forge her own redemption with her own two hands. She purchased a forgotten claim, unaware that it bordered not just a ranch, but a heart in equal need of mending. The sharp crack of a hammer rang out, dry and solitary in the silence of the Montana hills. Eleanor Sullivan brought the hammer down again, the impact jarring her arm, the dull ache in her back a constant companion. She grit her teeth, ignoring the November chill that seeped through her worn coat and the heavy weight of the child growing within her. Every nail she drove was an act of defiance against the world she had left behind, her breath plumed in the cold air. Around her, the skeleton of a log cabin was taking shape, a testament to sheer will in the heart of the wilderness. She was so focused, she didn't realize she was not alone. At the edge of the clearing, tucked into the shadow of the aspens, a man on horseback had been watching her in silence. He had been there long enough to count the rhythm of her breaths, to see the determination in every movement despite her body's fatigue. Finally, he urged his horse into the clearing, his voice low and steady, breaking the silence. "Pardon the intrusion. I thought this place was abandoned." Eleanor spun around, the hammer in her hand instantly becoming a defensive weapon. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You were mistaken," she replied, her voice sharp as flint. "This land and everything on it is mine. The way west is that way." The man tipped his hat slightly. "I'm Clayton Hartwell. Just riding the line for the Circle H Ranch." His gaze moved from the unfinished walls to her calloused hands, then landed delicately on her midsection. "This is hard labor, especially for a woman in your situation." "I don't need your pity," Eleanor said flatly, turning her back and striking a decisive blow against a beam. "It's not pity," Clayton said, his voice calm. "It's respect. It takes a rare kind of grit to do this." He dismounted, taking a step closer. "If you need help with the heaviest timbers... I have grit enough," she cut him off, not looking at him. "What I don't have is time for meddling strangers. Good day, Mr. Hartwell." She went back to her work, the sound of her hammer a final dismissal. Clayton stood a moment longer, then quietly turned, mounted his horse, and vanished into the trees. But the image of the defiant woman with the hammer in her hand stayed with him, a solitary and unyielding tune. 3 days passed. The morning sun hung low over the distant peaks, casting a pale pink glow on the frost that coated the ground. Each breath was a reminder of the coming winter. Eleanor was trying to set a heavy plank onto the frame of the wall. A sharp pain shot through her back, and her fingers, even inside her leather gloves, were numb and stiff. The baby seemed to have settled lower in the past week, bringing with it a new heaviness that made every small task feel monumental. She had finished the foundation, hauled every log herself from the woods. The root cellar was stocked, and the stone chimney she'd painstakingly built now drew smoke cleanly. But the walls were not done, and the snow whispered of harder days to come. She set the plank down with a grunt, catching her breath as another sharp pain lanced through her side. "You're pushing yourself too hard." The deep, familiar voice startled her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Clayton Hartwell stood there, beside his bay gelding, at the edge of the clearing. He looked less formal today, no vest, just a thick wool coat and eyes that saw too much. In his hands he held a checkered cloth bundle. Eleanor tightened her grip on the hammer, her defensive reflex already familiar. "I don't recall inviting guests." "No, you didn't," he answered gently, "but I figured I'd come anyway." He took a slow step forward and placed the bundle on a large oak stump nearby. "My mother insisted I bring this." Some tea with ginger, she swears by, and a few things she's been knitting. She said a woman in your situation would likely pretend she didn't need them, but that I should leave them all the same. Eleanor stared at the bundle. Nmoving. Clayton glanced at her cabin. It's coming along? You've done all this yourself? She gave a curt nod. Impressive, he said. His gaze shifted from her growing belly to her calloused hands. And painful, I imagine. Eleanor crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture to ward off the cold and to ward off a warmer feeling she did not want to feel. What is your true purpose here, Mr. Hartwell? Are you just satisfying some curiosity? Gathering a tale to tell back at your comfortable ranch? Clayton's gaze didn't flinch. I'm here because I wanted to be, and because I don't like the thought of you working through the pain alone when you don't have to. I am not a charity case. I never said you were. She took a step forward, her voice tight. You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. Men like you offer help as if it's some kind of blessing, but it always comes with a price, with expectations, with judgments. He didn't speak at first, just let her words hang in the cold morning air. Then, he said softly, Ma'am, sometimes a hand is offered not because someone sees weakness, but because they're in awe of the strength they're witnessing. Eleanor blinked, caught completely off guard by his answer. Clayton continued, his voice quieter now. I've seen men fold under less of a burden than what you're carrying. But here you are, building something real, alone, with no one watching, no one applauding. That's not weakness. That's rare. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. I won't stay, he added, gesturing to the bundle. Just thought you could use the tea, and maybe a reminder that not everyone who shows up wants to fix or claim you. Eleanor looked at the bundle, then at him. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any flirtation could have. He meant it. You can leave it there, she said finally. He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward his horse. She watched him go, the pulse in her ears louder. Then the wind. Only when he had completely vanished into the trees did she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She moved the oak stump and opened the cloth. Inside were 3 tiny knitted wool garments, a soft yellow, stitched with care, and a tin of tea leaves that smelled faintly of ginger and mint, for the first time since setting foot in this unforgiving territory. Something deep inside her cracked. Not enough to shatter, but just enough to feel. Another week passed, and the wind grew meaner. It slipped through the cracks in the unfinished walls, whistling a mournful tune. Inside, where stones marked the future outline of a fireplace, a small fire struggled for warmth. Eleanor sat on a way crate, her red, chapped hands wrapped around a cup of water. Opposite her, Clayton knelt, carefully adding another log to the woodpile. They had worked all morning, side by side. There were no declarations, no unnecessary conversation. Just the steady rhythm of a hammer, the bite of a saw, and the occasional breathless laugh when a stubborn plank splintered in protest. They had a rhythm now. He passed her the canteen, and this time, she took it without hesitation. You have the grit of 2 men, he said, his voice raspy from sawdust in the cold air. I had to, she replied, her gaze fixed on the dancing embers. I didn't have the luxury of waiting for someone to save me. He sat down beside her, on another log, pulling his coat tighter. She didn't look at him when she spoke again, her voice soft, almost lost in the wind. My life was once in Boston. A world of ivory lace and church bells. A proper wedding. She paused, the memory seeming a world away. 6 months into our marriage, when I told him about the baby, he turned his back on me. Claimed the child couldn't be his. Clayton turned his head slowly. The firelight danced in his eyes, but they held no judgment. I never even got to tell him the truth, Eleanor continued, her voice flat with a terrible calm. That he was wrong. That it was his child. He left before I could even say the words. The silence between them was heavier than the cold. The papers were drawn up, she exhaled, but never signed by a judge. In the eyes of the law, I am still bound to him. Clayton was quiet for a long moment. That's a heavy burden for one soul to bear alone. Eleanor glanced at him. You don't ask if I still love him. No, he said softly. I figure if you did, you wouldn't be here. An unexpected warmth spread through her chest, soothing the chill of her confession. For the first time she asked, her voice quiet, "What about you? You don't seem the type to ride alone just for the peace and quiet." His gaze left the fire and drifted toward the distant snow-dusted hills. Her name was Sarah, my wife. His voice deepened with memory. We married young. She had a spirit as wild as these hills. She loved to ride, to feel the wind. One morning, she pushed a young gelding too hard along the eastern ridge. The horse stumbled. I was the one who found her. Eleanor's heart stilled. I was 28. That was 5 winters ago. Since then, I ride, I mend fences, and I keep to myself, not because I'm afraid to love again. I just didn't see the point. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. I am too, he said, a quiet acceptance in his voice. But I'm still here. And so are you. The wind howled outside, spiraling snow and burst through the cabin's unfinished doorway. They worked for a few more hours, he chiseling beams for the roof frame while she measured lengths for the door. Their movements found a harmony that neither of them commented on, as if speaking of it would break the fragile spell. When the sun dipped behind the peaks, leaving long violet shadows across the valley, they sat again, this time on the half-finished porch. Eleanor wrapped her shawl around her belly, her gloved hands trembling slightly from exertion. Clayton offered his coat. She refused, but after a beat of silence, she said quietly, I've always believed it was safer to rely on no one but myself. But sitting here now, I'm starting to wonder if what I called safety was just another word for loneliness. Clayton looked at her, not with pity, not with possession, but with something steadier and warmer. Maybe was all he said. And for once, the wind seemed to pass gently through the timber walls, as if, for that moment, it had decided not to push them apart. By the time the first hard frost turned the tall grasses to brittle glass, the valley wind carried more than the promise of winter. It carried whispers. Fragments of rumor, laced with curiosity and judgment, drifted into the town of Willow Creek. With every passing wagon, they spoke of a woman alone in the wilderness, too proud to accept charity, too stubborn to fit society's mold. But more than that, they spoke of the visits. Of Clayton Hartwell, the respected son of a rancher, seen too often riding south, staying too long near a half-built home, and a woman who wore her shame like armor. Eleanor had heard the whispers at the general store, when she traded eggs for flour. The clerk's polite smile was now tight-lipped. The Kowalskis, kind as they had been, had grown cautious, their questions more clipped. She pretended not to notice until one cold morning, with the ground hard beneath her boots and the air sharp with pine and secrets, a carriage she did not recognize rolled into her clearing. It was no homesteader's wagon. It was sleek and black, with finely crafted wheels, pulled by a matched pair of horses. The woman who stepped out moved with the air of someone born to command a room. Her coat was imported wool, her gloves lambskin, her hair pinned in elaborate twists that spoke of servants and salons. Miss Sullivan, the woman said, her voice crisp and cool as she surveyed the modest porch. I am Victoria Morrison. I trust the name is not unfamiliar to you, even out here. Eleanor didn't speak at first. She straightened, her hand instinctively going to her swelling belly in a quiet, protective gesture. I know of you, she replied, her voice surprisingly calm. Victoria's gaze swept over the cabin, the sawdust, the unpainted walls, then it settled on Eleanor. Then I will be brief. This Association you have with Mr. Hartwell must cease, immediately. Eleanor lifted her chin. There is no arrangement. Then end the association, Victoria said. He visits often. People talk. His family's name is being dragged through every parlor in Willow Creek and beyond. I never asked him to come. But you never sent him away, did you? Victoria's smile was thin and brittle. You let him stay. You let him help. And now my fiancé hesitates to set a wedding date, while the town wonders if he's fathering another man's illegitimate child. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her voice held steady. He is a free man, Mrs. Morrison. I have not seduced him, nor do I seek his name or fortune. No, just his attention, his time, his reputation. Victoria stepped forward. You think I am heartless, that I do not understand hardship. I do. What I do not accept is allowing a scandal to blossom in plain sight, while good men lose their standing because of misplaced chivalry. Eleanor felt her nails dig into her palms. I built this cabin alone, she said. Split my own firewood, sewed clothes for a child who will never know the comfort of a legitimate name. I have asked nothing of your fiancé but kindness. I have kept to myself. Not enough, Victoria snapped. Because your presence still haunts him, and your silence lets the world imagine the worst. She drew a deep breath, the cold mist curling from her lips. Leave, sell the land. Go back east, or vanish into some other town that will take a woman in your situation, but do not stay here. Not where he can see you, not where his future is being whittled down one scandalous story at a time. Eleanor felt a heat rise in her face. You do not own him. But I know how this world works, Victoria said. Men may be drawn to romantic notions, the nobility of a woman struggling against the wild. But they do not build their lives on such things. They marry sense. They marry stability. They marry the future, not a tragic story. She stepped back. Make it easier on him, on all of us, before this ends worse. When the carriage wheels vanished into the forest and the silence returned, Eleanor stood unmoving. The cold bit through her shawl, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Later she would sweep the porch. She would restack the logs Clayton had chopped last week. She would boil tea and feel the baby kick beneath her ribs. But for that moment, she stood on the porch, her body aching and her heart heavier than any timber beam she'd ever lifted. She looked out into the wild that had become her only refuge, and she whispered to no one, Am I destroying the only good man who ever saw me as something other than broken? Snow had fallen. Not a raging blizzard, but a quiet, steady blanketing that hushed the earth. The world outside Eleanor's cabin seemed to be holding its breath. It had been days since Victoria Morrison's visit. Every day Eleanor had lived with those sharp, cutting words, and they had planted something far more dangerous than fear in her heart. Doubt, with every whistle of the wind through the pines. She braced for another confrontation, for Clayton to arrive with anger in his voice or disappointment in his eyes. But when he did come, he brought neither. The sound of his horse's hooves, deliberate and familiar, reached her ears before a knock could. She swung the door open before he could raise his hand. Snowflakes scattered from his shoulders and the brim of his hat. His coat was dusted in white, his cheeks red from the cold and from an unshakable conviction. Eleanor, he said, his voice low and calm, I need to talk to you. She stepped aside. You shouldn't be here. This is exactly where I should be, he answered. Stepping inside, the fire in the makeshift hearth flickered across his features as he removed his gloves. His movements were different now, no hesitation, no polite uncertainty, only resolve. She stood near the hearth, arms folded over her belly, as if trying to shield both herself and the life inside from what was coming. I went home, he began, and I told my father the engagement is off. I told him I would not marry Victoria Morrison, that I would not be shamed into building a life I do not believe in. Eleanor's breath caught. He was furious, Clayton said simply. Threatened to cut me off, called me a fool. But I did not back down. Clayton, she started, but he raised a hand. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because you need to understand. This is not about pity or rebellion or some romantic fancy. He stepped closer, his voice gentling. This is about choosing what is real. You, this place, that child. Eleanor, I have found more honesty in the set of your jaw and the strength in your hands than in a lifetime of polite society and hollow promises. Eleanor blinked, her throat tightening. You can't throw away your future on a scandal, she whispered. I'm not throwing anything away, he replied. I'm building something new. A long silence filled the space between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Eleanor turned her face to the flames, her hands trembling. There's something. You don't know, she said, her voice barely a breath. Something I should have told you from the beginning. Clayton waited. His silence was steady, unflinching. I am not divorced, she said. Legally. I am still the wife of Charles Whitmore, the man who left me the moment I told him I was expecting. Clayton's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. I thought it was over. I left Boston with papers unsigned, believing he would file them. But no document ever arrived, no final decree. And I didn't have the strength to chase it down. I just wanted to disappear. She turned toward him now, eyes shining with guilt and something that looked like shame. I am not a widow. I am not a free woman, at least in the eyes of the law. And you deserve to know that, before you throw your life into ruin for someone who can give you nothing. The words hung in the air like frost, sharp and glinting. Clayton stepped forward until he stood directly before her. Then, without hesitation, he reached out and took her hands, her rough, calloused, builder's hands. Do you think this changes how I feel? He said softly. She tried to pull back, but he held fast, gentle and firm. It only makes me want to fight. Harder for you. Her breath hitched. I have seen what you've endured. I know the cost you've paid. And I see you still choosing to stand, still choosing to build. That does not make you a burden. That makes you braver than anyone I know. I can't offer you anything, she whispered. Not a name, not a proper future. Just this snow, this silence, and a child that's not even born yet. You offered me the truth, Clayton said. You offered me something real. That's more than I ever had with anyone else. She looked up at him now, truly looked. And what she saw was not pity, not charity. It was love. The fire crackled behind them as the wind sighed against the cabin walls. And for the first time since the world had turned against her, Eleanor felt the weight in her chest begin to shift. Not gone, but shared. Clayton's hand never left hers, and neither did his promise. Deep winter night. Moonlight silvered the snow-covered clearing, turning it into a silent, magical world. In its midst, the cabin stood like a defiant heartbeat, framed by bare trees and the distant hush of wolves. Inside, Eleanor Sullivan sat by the wooden cradle she was carving. Her hand rested on its rail, but her heart was pounding with a rhythm she could not name. Not fear, not joy. Something in between, like a breath held too long. Clayton stood near the hearth, his shadow stretching toward her like an unspoken promise. You shouldn't have come back, she said quietly, her eyes on the floor. He didn't move. You knew I would. What we feel doesn't matter, she said, finally looking at him for just a moment. You know that, Clayton. We can't rewrite the law or erase judgment. I'm not trying to rewrite anything, he answered. I'm just trying to write something that finally feels true. She stood abruptly, her hands pressing to the small of her back as the baby inside her shifted. It kicked hard, as if it too sensed the storm beneath her skin. Do you truly believe love is enough to conquer all of this? She retorted, her voice sharp with desperation. Love doesn't quiet the whispers in town. It doesn't dissolve a marriage contract in Boston. It doesn't protect a child from the judgment that will follow him all his days. I don't care about the town, but you should." Her voice trembled with emotion. "Because they will care about you. About the son of the Circle H choosing a married woman with a bastard child and a past full of scandal." Clayton's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "That child is no one's shame. He is yours, Eleanor. And because of that, he already has more honor than half the men I know." Eleanor felt the breath rush from her lungs. She turned away, one trembling hand bracing against the window frame. "I've spent months wondering if I was strong enough to do this alone," she whispered. "And now that someone offers to carry some of that weight, all I feel is fear." Clayton silently crossed the floor until he stood just behind her, close enough for his warmth to reach her through the space. "Why are you afraid?" he asked softly. "Because I have believed in promises before," she answered, her voice barely audible. "And they turned to dust in my mouth. Because I trusted a man to stay, and he left without even asking if the child was his. And now you think I'll do the same." Clayton's voice was low. She didn't answer. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Eleanor," he said, "I know what it is to lose someone, to have the ground ripped out from under your feet. My wife, she died on a morning that started like any other. One minute she was laughing about my coffee being too strong. The next her horse had bolted, and she never opened her eyes again. She turned slowly, her face stricken. I buried her under a cottonwood tree," he said, "and every day since I've lived like the world owed me nothing. I stopped believing in fate, in joy, in any of it." He reached up and cupped her face, his touch both gentle and reverent. "Until I rode into your clearing and saw you driving a nail like it owed you rent." A startled laugh, half sob, half disbelief, broke from her throat. "You're not some lost woman I stumbled across," he continued. "You're the fire I didn't know I needed. And I don't want to lose that. Not because of laws I didn't write, not because of people too cowardly to build something for themselves." Her hands came up, touching his wrists, but not pushing him away. "I don't know how to let you in," she said softly. "I've built so many walls, I forgot where the door is." He leaned his forehead to hers, his voice breaking. "Then let me help you find it." For a moment, the world narrowed to just them. The snow outside, the warmth within, and a fragile thread of hope pulling tight. "I lost my wife once," Clayton whispered, his voice full of memory and new resolve. "I will not lose you, Eleanor. Not now, not when I have finally found a reason to build again." Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in years she did not feel alone. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of lead. Eleanor gripped the porch railing as a biting wind stirred the pines into nervous whispers. The baby had been restless all morning, kicking low and sharp, as if it too sensed what was coming. Snow began. Not in gentle flakes, but thick and heavy, falling fast. Within an hour, the world had disappeared in a blur of white. Inside, Eleanor lit every lamp, laid out towels, and boiled water. Her pulse was a wild drum of dread. And then it came a wave of pure fire that seized her from within, stealing the air from her lungs and forcing her to double over the rough-hewn table. Her eyes were wide with pain. "Not now," she whispered. "Not like this." She was utterly alone. Miles away, at the Circle H ranch, Clayton Hartwell saddled his best horse. The turn of the sky had told him everything. A deep unease, an instinct that screamed louder than reason, spurred him on. She needed him. He rode into the storm, but it swallowed him. Visibility vanished. The storm was a blind, roaring beast. In a hidden drift, his horse lost its footing, a sickening lurch, followed by a fall that sent him flying into the bone-chilling water of a hidden creek. Got the shock of the cold, stole the air from his lungs. A sharp pain lanced through his shoulder as he hit a rock beneath the water. He lay there a long moment, snowflakes melting on his lashes. "She needs me," he groaned, dragging himself from the water. The horse, spooked, was gone. So he walked. He pushed through waist-deep snow, against a wind that screamed like a banshee. One step, then another. At the cabin, Eleanor fought. She screamed, she bled, her body burning and breaking. She cried out for strength, for her father, for mercy. The storm rattled the walls, and then, a cry. Raw, beautiful. Her son, she sobbed, cradling the tiny body, kissing its damp skin, whispering every prayer she'd ever known. But Clayton had not come. And the storm was only getting worse. Fear clawed at her chest. What if he was lost? What if she had survived this moment only? To lose the one man who had seen her not as a burden, but as something worthy of love? She rocked her son, tears falling silently. "You'll be safe," she whispered, "even if it's just me." A knock. Faint. Then again, firmer. She froze. The door creaked open. Clayton stood there, soaked in snow, blood on his shirt, his face pale with pain. "Clayton!" She gasped. He stumbled inside and dropped to his knees near the fire. Steam rose from his coat, his breath shallow and ragged. And then he saw the baby. Their eyes met. No words were needed. He reached out a trembling hand, brushing the tiny fist at her chest. "Well, Eleanor," he rasped, "looks like you finished building your family without me. Is there room for one more?" Her throat closed. She could have said no, perhaps should have. But instead, she gently shifted the baby into his arms. "Only if you're sure," she whispered. Never been more sure. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a new kind of warmth took hold. A home, a promise. A beginning neither of them had dared to dream. And this time, Eleanor knew she was not alone anymore. Spring didn't announce itself with the first wildflower, but with something far more subtle, the yielding of the earth beneath a person's boots. The ground, once hard as iron, had softened, welcoming their steps. Birds began to sing from the branches, and the scent of pine warmed in the sunlight. Inside the cabin, the fire still crackled, but warmth also came from the laughter of two people who had once known only silence. Eleanor stepped outside with a bucket in hand. Her newborn son, Thomas, sleeping peacefully in a linen sling against her chest. Nearby, Clayton was on his knees, driving the first post for the new kitchen they were adding on. "Ground's softening up early," he called out, looking up with a grin. She smiled back. "Or maybe it knows we have work to do." He stood, dusting off his hands. "Either way, we need more room. Especially for this growing boy." That afternoon, Eleanor sat at the table, signing a letter to a Boston law office. It was her official request for divorce from Charles Whitmore. Her hand trembled slightly. As she sealed it, a final act of closing a chapter of her life. Clayton came in then, sawdust on his sleeves and sun in his smile. "You did it," he said. She nodded. "The last piece of the past, sealed and sent." He bent and kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you." They didn't celebrate with rings or a preacher. They celebrated with a simple supper with the Kowalskis and a few other neighbors. Eleanor made stew, and Clayton hung lanterns. As the sky turned to lavender, he stood and took her hand. "I want to toast the strongest person I have ever had the honor to know," he said, his voice clear and steady for all to hear. "When I first rode into this clearing, I thought I was the one offering help. I was wrong. She was the one who saved me." Eleanor smiled softly, her heart full. Here, love was proven in stacks of firewood, not signatures on a document. A week later, Eleanor stepped outside to see Clayton finishing the door to the new kitchen. She had asked what he was working on, but he had only smiled and told her to wait. Now in the late light, she saw it. Affixed to the new door was a handle made from an old twisted horseshoe, hammered and smoothed into a perfect curve. "Found it half buried down by the creek," he explained. "Looked like useless scrap. Turns out it just needed a new purpose." She traced its worn shape with her finger. He nodded, understanding her unspoken thought. "Some broken things still have strength in them," he said softly. The wildflowers bloomed, Thomas grew, and on one golden evening, Eleanor sat at her writing desk with a piece of her father's old, faded blue stationery. She wrote, "Dearest Father, you once told me that a home is not built of logs and nails, but of a feeling. I never understood what you meant until now. I built the cabin, yes, but it took a quiet, stubborn rancher with kindness in his eyes to turn it into a home. We are not alone anymore. You're Eleanor." She folded the letter and placed it in her father's old tin box. Outside, Thomas let out his first real laugh. Clayton, mending a fence post, looked up. Eleanor walked toward him, baby in her arms, heart full. The wind carried the scent of pine and promise. Spring had come, and with it, everything she had never dared to dream.